Alright, so today I'm a little bit behind on this video, but I wanted to make one anyways because I think it's a pretty important topic. And I want to talk about Greta Thunberg and tie it a little bit into kind of the Maxime Bernier aspect of it. The Americans that are watching this probably won't really know anything about it, but any of the Canadians will. So Greta Thunberg, basically, if you don't know, is a girl with Asperger's, I believe, from Sweden, who's a climate change activist. And the left has really recently heralded her as kind of a darling of the quote-unquote climate change movement. And she became even a little more in the news in that she was taking this quote-unquote zero carbon trip from Sweden to the U.S. to attend some climate change conference, even though, I mean, it really isn't zero carbon, because obviously the boat would have, to build it, they needed food, they needed other people on board, and not to mention, too, they needed a crew to fly over to bring the boat back anyways, so they would have been much better off just to fly it over. So it's kind of hypocritical in that aspect. And the other thing, too, is that so Maxime Bernier was a little bit, I wouldn't say heavily, I mean, the left, no matter what Bernier does, the left thinks that he's off the rocker. I mean, it's the same. Bernier is kind of similar to, in Canada, at least for a much lesser extent, as Trump is in the U.S. Like, Trump could cure cancer, and the left would think that, he's putting doctors out of work, or Trump could say that he's pro-oxygen, and the left would suffocate themselves. Like, that's kind of how Bernier is in Canada, if you don't know. And so he was a little bit critical, and like I said, the left thinks that he's really critical, but he wasn't that critical of Thunberg, and not necessarily Thunberg in particular, partially due to the fact that people are used. The left tends to, for whatever reason nowadays, I mean, they have throughout history too when you look back, but they want to use kids to prop up their whatever. I mean, gun control. They use the Parkland kids, now Greta Thunberg, and on one hand, they'll claim that kids are too immature to, own guns or to have a voice, but when it's something they agree with, then all of a sudden they're great. And, for example, if Greta Thunberg was a big Second Amendment advocate, let's say, and she was American, the left would vilify her. They'd say, "Oh, well, she's only a teenager. Why should we listen to her?" But when people do that on the other side, it's somehow a bad thing. And like Maxime Bernier pointed out, one of two things is going on in her situation specifically. Either she's perfectly competent to be in the debate room or whatever you want to call it with this issue, or she isn't capable of being in the debate room or the idea, she isn't capable of being debated, and she's in over her head, and in which case the left is just using her to prop up their own agenda. Either way, either she's perfectly capable of being criticized, in which case they're just being completely hyperbolic when it comes to Bernier, or they're just using her as a political pawn, basically. And I mean, it's clearly the political pawn one. I mean, at least a little bit of both. I mean, she's probably competent enough to understand what's going on, but I think it's more or less the political pawn aspect, in that the left is really struggling to convince people of climate change. Like I cited in one of the videos, I said 35% of Canadians are climate change skeptics, and that's after all the propaganda that's hit out at us on a daily basis, and yet still that's how many people don't believe it. And the point I made is that imagine if it was the other way around. Imagine if we were told thousands and thousands of times, it just being pumped out at us that climate change is fake, climate change is fake, climate change is fake. 99% of people wouldn't believe in it because the scientists don't even believe in it. So it would be the most fringe of fringe ideologies to believe in climate change. And getting into the actual science aspect of it is a whole different video in and of itself, and I've done videos on it, so if you want to go see that, go look. But I mean, in essence, the climate change activists they're really kind of running out of time in a sense, in that if they keep saying the same message over and over again, eventually more and more people, I mean, this is already happening, which is why they're doing it, is that people are going to say, hey, you've been saying the same thing over and over, and it hasn't happening. And you've been saying the ocean levels are going to rise for generations. You've been saying that um, the as places on Earth are going to be uninhabitable because it's so hot. There's going to be horrible droughts, all this kind of stuff that hasn't came to fruition. Eventually, even a lot of the stupid people that believe in it are going to start questioning it. So they have to keep amping up the level of what they're saying. First it went from the ice caps are going to melt if in 10 years if we don't do anything, and that didn't happen. And then it's going to be the ocean levels are going to rise and cities are going to become uninhabitable. And then that didn't happen, and the people who said it are buying. A lot of them are buying oceanfront property, and that didn't happen. So then now we're at the world's going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change, and when 2030 or whenever, roughly 2030. Once we get into the 2020s, I don't even know what they're going to say, but they're just having to amp it up and amp it up and amp it up because people are going to start to question it more and more. But the more you can keep them panicked and afraid, the easier it is to keep people believing in the cause. And the other aspect of this too that I would like to point out too is that I seen a video yesterday or the day before, but suicide for men is at an all-time high in the UK, and I believe in the US and Canada it's very, very high too. It might not be an all-time high, but it's pretty close. And even for girls, it's on the rise, but men, it's insanely high. Obviously, I've made a video about that before. Go check out the male suicide video if you want to see more about that. But part of the reason has got to be that we're totally propagandized about this idea that we're gonna, the world's gonna end in 12 years if we don't do something about it. Like, there's enough things that kids have to deal with that are already stressful, that are already, causing anxiety, and yet we're propagandizing people with the world's going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change BS. Like, it's just one more thing on top of the tons of other things that are already, like I said, being pumped out at kids and even adults nowadays. And it's just adding on to this, and it needs to stop because, kids are killing themselves because of this. Like, climate change, even if you believe in it, let's say, like I've said before and I'll say again, even if you believe in it, the government's not going to figure it out. The government is so incompetent, it takes way longer than it says on every project they do. They can't balance the budget. Their healthcare system's always way worse than it is. Like, everything the government does, they're either completely incompetent or they do much worse than what the average person would, guess that they would do. But yet somehow they're going to fix climate change. Like, according to them, the biggest issue right now by far is climate change, and yet somehow they're going to fix it when they can't even fix little things. Like, they can't even fix the most basic of basic things, but yet the government's going to fix this huge, massive issue. Like, it makes no sense, and it's such a contradictory position, it's not even funny. But I think I'll leave it there as far as this video goes. I think I got the point across pretty good. So if you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.